The topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the host and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
What's working on purpose anyway? Each week, we ponder the answer to this question. People ache for meaning and purpose at work, to contribute their talents passionately and know their lives really matter. They crave being part of an organization that inspires them and helps them grow into realizing their highest potential. Business can be such a force for good in the world, elevating humanity. In our program, we provide guidance and inspiration to help usher in this world we all want, working on purpose. Now, here's your host, Dr. Elise Cortez.
Welcome back to the Working on Purpose program. Thanks for tuning in again this week. Great to have you. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez, joining you live from Dallas, which is home base for me. If we've not met yet and you don't know me, I'm a management consultant, organizational logotherapist, speaker, and author. My team and I at Elise Cortez and Associates help companies to enliven their operations by articulating their purpose and building inspirational leaders and cultures activated by meaning and purpose to turn those companies from a flatline EKG to a vibrant workplace. There, people are intrinsically motivated to perform at their best, grow into their fuller potential, and are committed to stay and help deliver on the company's mission. You can learn more about us and how we can work together at elisecortez.com. Now, for today's program, with us today is Charles Jones, known as the Emotion Decoder. He's the author of Emotional Intelligence for Stress-Free Leadership, Turn Emotional Pain into Performance Gain with the Tenor Method. We'll be talking about his perspective on how our current understanding of emotions is outdated, his own theory of the role and potential of emotions, and the Tenor Method he developed to help us understand and best draw from our emotions. He joins you today from Boulder, Colorado. Charles, welcome to Working on Purpose.
Thank you, Elise. I'm happy to be here.
I'm happy that I joined you for one of your webinars and I learned about your work. And you know, since I'm a social scientist and I very much care about advancing the conversation on how do we create those workplaces where we can really become our best. To me, the work that you're doing on emotional intelligence is pivotal, Charles. So I'm very happy to have you on. Thank you. And I also want to just, showcase this beautiful book that you've written. It's gorgeous. It's tight. It's jam-packed with all kinds of things. Emotional intelligence for stress-free leadership. Fantastic. So as we get into this first segment here, I want to first just call out something that you did that nobody to date has ever done. You went and you looked through my latest book, The Great Revitalization, which just came out in March. So I have three other books before that, but you took it upon yourself to actually go through the concepts of that book and kind of highlight how a few of them cross over and make for a nice conversation for your topic. And I want to just call that out first. It's brilliant, and I really appreciate that. It's dynamic, it's creative, and yummy is another great technical word to call it.
I would add respectful and considerate.
I would add those are very delightful terms.
Yes.
Well, so what I want to do is I want to call it just a couple things that you put in your notes here for that, and we'll start the conversation there. But you wrote back to me when we were prepping for this. You said that in looking at my book that I point out that knowledge is accumulating quickly, and it behooves us to make a practice of updating our assumptions about the world and the strategies we use to get things done. You say, I would add that since painful emotions are indicative of problems, that is, needs we are not yet on track to fulfill, every painful emotion is an opportunity to update our worldview and our way of being and serving. Completely agree with that. Do you want to add a little something more to that?
Sure. So one of the big discoveries I think I've made in my career is this idea that emotions are status reports, if you will, progress reports, if you will, from our subconscious as to what needs of ours we are on track to fulfill and what needs we're not on track to fulfill. And these needs, these psychological needs that generate our emotions, they're things like achieving goals, mitigating risks, protecting assets, asserting rights. They represent our humanity. And when a painful emotion arises, it's a call to our conscious mind to say, hey, down here in the engine room, I need a little bit of help. We're not on track to fulfill some need of ours. And that's why I say that problems
Excuse me.
are needs we're not on track to fulfill, and painful emotions alert us to the existence of problems. And when I say us, I'm really referring to our conscious mind, this extraordinary capacity that human beings have to reflect on their own cognition and make adjustments to it. And in this world we live in today, where things are changing as quickly as they are, then many of the beliefs and strategies we have that are driving our perception and behavior quickly become out of date. And so every time a painful emotion arises, it's an opportunity to check in with ourselves, examine that subconscious programming, make changes to it, and in that way, we continue to be the most adaptive species on the planet.
Okay, so Charles, that was already worth the price of admission right there. That was stunningly beautiful. And again, sorry, I'm going to cough just a minute. Let me quickly mute because I got a cough. Excuse me. We are alive and well with pollen here in Dallas. Thank you very much. Welcome, spring. If you don't mind, I want to go back to what you were just saying there. I've never heard anybody say this so crisply, that you said that, if I have this right, emotions are reports of our progress from our subconscious on our goals or on our needs, Is that what you said?
Yes, and of course, one of our needs is to fulfill, that we try to fulfill, is to achieve the goals we've set for ourselves.
Okay.
So that's one of the subconscious needs that people are probably the most familiar with. And frustration is the emotion that arises when we are not on track to achieve a goal.
I think also it's really alluring what you just did there, where you really helped us understand that we must continually upgrade the way that we perceive and interact with the world to keep pace with just how fast it's evolving. And I think that's critical. And if we're relying on ideas and theories that were developed even 10 years ago, let alone 20 or 30, we're severely working at a disadvantage.
Absolutely. And I think you go even further back in your life, and many of the beliefs and strategies that human beings as adults embody were forged when they were children. And not only has the world changed, but their capacity to cognize the world has changed substantially since then.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah. Something else that you said that I thought was really important is you talk about, since people who listen to the show know I'm a logotherapist, so that really has meaning as our chief concern and our chief source of energy. I like how you also said in your notes to me that mental health and well-being are at the intersection of logotherapy and what you call emotional responsibility. Would you say more about that?
Sure. So, logotherapy, which you are the expert on and I am not, but my understanding of it is, we are meaning-making creatures, right? And what gets us out of bed in the morning is things that are meaningful to us. And
Yes.
What is meaningful to us? And what's meaningful to us can be anything as simple as fulfilling a need of ours, like having a good meal, to something as abstract as leaving a legacy and leaving the world a better place than the one we arrived to in some particular fashion. And so these narratives we have in which we construct meaning in the world and ultimately our place in it, those narratives, I believe, are stored in the subconscious programming that goes into each of our needs. We all have a need to live what we consider to be a good life, but the narratives on what the good life is are varied and have changed over time, right? And so until we can become an observer of what those stories are, we can't be in choice about how we might want to modify those stories to adjust to the situations we find ourselves, the changes that are happening in the world, and our own evolution development as a human being.
I would add one more nuance there, Charles, and this is just, I knew this was going to be a lovely, nice, crunchy conversation. with regard to the idea of, what's a meaningful life or what's a worthwhile life or whatever, of course, that's incredibly individual because meaning is registered along our values. And what you value is probably different than what I value. And so where that gets interesting is then how to separate what society says is a good life from what we individuals say is a good life. So I've chosen a very different journey than a lot of other people in my sphere because I value different things. And so that's important to point out that it isn't a one size fits all kind of thing. It's very individualized. So go ahead.
Well, yes, and we are inherently social beings with an
Yes.
extremely high need for belonging.
Yes.
And one of the emotions I've studied the most is shame. And shame
Mm.
really appears in this intersection. So the psychological need behind shame is the need to personify ideals. And
Mm.
when we're on track to personify those ideals, we feel proud of ourselves. And when we're not on track, we feel ashamed.
Mm-hmm.
And those ideals that we grow up with are typically going to be forged by what our caregivers approved and disapproved, gave us love and withheld love in response to, right? And we're largely, as young children, at the effect of that. We need to belong. We need to maintain that connection to our caregivers. We need to attach. And then we grow up and we go to school and we have our peers and everything else. And then at some point, I think for most people, it's probably around 35, it's like, okay, that's been true up until now,
Yes.
but what ideals am I going to choose to personify for the rest of my life? And those ideals are much more likely to be based on what's unique about me
Yes.
rather than trying to personify some kind of specialness that society says, right? There can only be so many jocks and brains and cool kids and everything else. But this notion that you could kind of forge a set of ideals that you then seek to personify that's grounded in your uniqueness and the way in which that uniqueness is a contribute to the world, a
Mm-hmm.
contribution to the world.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Soren Kaplan, who was on the show earlier, would classify that in some ways as he looks at it through the lens of experiential intelligence, which gives us a unique lens on the world through which we can contribute and see something that maybe no one else can. So it just really speaks to the uniqueness you're talking about. So listeners and viewers, you can clearly see here that Charles has got a very deep acumen in this subject matter. So now I think it makes sense, now that we've got your attention, that this is a whole new frontier. Now it makes sense, I think, Charles, if you could tell us where this whole idea came from, where your interest in this subject matter came from. It's really quite varied and interesting. If you could just give us the brief overview of that.
Sure, sure. Well, what I call this body of work I've developed called emotional responsibility has multiple sources. I think it really begins with I grew up, my father, who I very much admired, was a scientist and an engineer. And I was fascinated by evolution, particularly hominid evolution, and particularly our capacity for adaptation. Human beings have can live in any ecosystem on the world, in submarines underneath the ocean, out in space. We're extraordinary adaptable creatures. And that fascinated me. But what also fascinated me, and this really became a concern to me in the last year of high school, the first couple of years of college, was that despite this capacity we have as human beings to reflect on our own cognition and adjust it and continually upgrade it, we often find ourselves, I often find myself, the people around me often find myself, and on a very large scale, I see humanity persisting in beliefs and behaviors that do not serve us. When a moment of metacognition would have us take a mental step back, think about what we're doing, what needs we're trying to fulfill, and change our beliefs or strategies in order to be more effective in the world. And why is it that we don't always do that? We do that a lot, and yet there's these times that we don't seem to do it. Like, what is it that trips us up? And so This inquiry, this search for the root cause analysis of what I would call humanity's adaptive deficit disorder, this root cause analysis caused me to study Western psychology, Eastern mysticism, mythology, pretty much any philosophy that was kind of out there, as well as cognitive science and behavioral science and anthropology, et cetera, it just sent me into all these directions. And I had a suspicion, perhaps based on some of my own kind of personal trauma from childhood, actually, that emotions were involved. And my initial thought, not so different than maybe the mainstream view of emotional intelligence, is that so-called negative emotions like fear and anxiety and anger and stuff, that's what's tripping us up. And then I made a huge breakthrough, which is actually emotions drive human development. They are what make us adaptive. What gets in the way is a widespread misunderstanding, misinterpretation, this belief that our emotions are being caused by what's happening out there in the world. You ask a coworker for some data that you need in order to complete a report that's due tomorrow. The coworker says, sorry, too busy, can't get it to you. Suddenly you're frustrated and you attribute your frustration to what that person, the fact your coworker won't cooperate with you, or someone says something offensive or violates a right of yours, and it's like, you made me angry. So this widespread attribution error, this belief that our emotions are being caused by what's happening in the world, that's the root cause of humanity's adaptive deficit disorder.
Oh, Charles, we are going to grab our first break because I want listeners and viewers to be able to chew on and digest a little bit of what you just put forth. It's stunningly compelling and beautiful. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez. We're on the air with Charles Jones. He's the author of Emotional Intelligence for Stress-Free Leadership, Turning Emotional Pain into Performance Gain with the Tenor Method. We've been talking a bit about how our work together produces hopefully a higher result, and in getting into his theory. After the break, we're going to continue diving more into it and later hear about his actual method. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Dr. Elise Cortez is a management consultant specializing in meaning and purpose, an inspirational speaker and author. She helps companies visioneer for greater purpose among stakeholders and develop purpose-inspired leadership and meaning-infused cultures that elevate fulfillment, performance, and commitment within the workforce. To learn more or to invite Elise to speak to your organization, please visit her at elisecortez.com. Let's talk about how to get your employees working on purpose. This is Working on Purpose with Dr. Elise Cortez. To reach our program today or to open a conversation with Elise, send an email to Elise, A-L-I-S-E, at elisecortez.com. Now, back to Working on Purpose.
Thanks for staying with us and welcome back to Working on Purpose. Before we get back into the program, I do want to announce to you that I am very excited to tell you that I'm launching a Purpose and Joy Tour with Joyly. This is a collaboration with Joyly, and they are an organization that teaches mindful practices to build happy, healthy, resilient world. And my firm, Elise Cortez and Associates, that exists to awaken people to their passion and purpose and build leadership and cultures that support these efforts. So together, what we're doing is we're going to 33 different cities across the United States, starting in Dallas in March, and finishing in Virginia Beach in October, to find our tribe and build a community of people who seek to elevate their lives and businesses by cultivating meaning, purpose, and joy. You can find a list of cities, dates, and planned events at gusto-now.com. Go to the tour tab. Very excited to come to you in your own backyard. So find your city, mark your calendar, and register for the events. We'll see you there. If you're just joining the program today, my guest is Charles Jones. He's the Emotion Decoder, who has developed a fresh and what I would call elevated method of understanding and working from our emotions. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez. So before we get more further into the theory of what it is that's behind your actual approach here, I want to really call out and celebrate what you put in your book. You talk about the assumption implicit in many statements about emotions is that especially strong emotions lead to reactive behavior and irrational decision making, and therefore cannot be trusted. And of course, you disagree. So if you could say a little bit more about why you disagree, and then we'll get more into the theory here.
Sure. So emotions properly interpreted are feedback regarding our own effectiveness, right? So why wouldn't you want that feedback? If I have set a goal for myself and my subconscious, which processes information 250,000 times faster than my conscious mind, if it sends up a red flag of frustration, letting me know I'm not on track to achieve my goal, I want to know about it. Now, if I recognize the frustration as a a distress call from my subconscious and a request for me, the conscious mind, to examine what goal I'm trying to achieve and how I'm going about it and how I'm measuring my progress toward it, and then making an adjustment to one of those three things, then my frustration is my best friend, my greatest advisor in keeping me productive and achieving in my life, as an example.
Mm-hmm.
So in contrast, if I'm interpreting my frustration as being caused by what's happening in the world, I'm not taking responsibility that this is feedback regarding my own effectiveness. And I am blaming my frustration on the coworker that won't cooperate with me, then the thinking and actions I will take that's downstream from that misinterpretation of what's causing my frustration is going to likely damage my relationship with my coworker. And I'm going to be focused on fixing the blame rather than fixing the problem and getting back on track to fulfill my need. So, and other emotions can be even worse. So anger, that arises when my subconscious need to assert what I believe to be my rights, my right to receive credit for my work, my right to have a life outside of work, my right to have to go on vacation, be able to use my vacation time, whatever it is. Those be some workplace examples. The right to hold an employee of mine accountable, right? So anger is alerting me to the fact that I'm not on track to assert a right of mine. And rights are hugely important. They structure human society. Our entire legal system is based on rights, right? And so if I'm interpreting my anger correctly, then it's pushing me in the direction of becoming more effective at asserting my rights. And because my attention is focused on rights, I will tend to consider the rights of the other person at the same time. Someone who was very clear about this was Mahatma Gandhi. He described himself as an intensely angry man, right? But he was crystal clear that that his anger was saying, hey, you're not on track to assert the right of self-determination for the Indian people. You need to get back on track. You need to come up with another strategy, right? And that strategy needs to be one that respects the rights of the British, right? So he was very clear that anger was a force for mutual respect, right? In contrast, the way most people interpret their anger is, I'm angry because you did something wrong and you deserve to be punished, right? Then my job becomes teaching you a lesson, getting you to do what's right or punish you for having done something that's wrong. That's not helpful. That's destructive.
Yes, it really is.
Right? So the culprit isn't anger. The culprit is what I call the circumstantial view of emotions. I call the other view of emotion the effectiveness view of emotion. So am I interpreting my emotions as feedback on my circumstances or as feedback on my effectiveness?
I think it's important to reiterate here because you have such a, you've been at this for decades, and listeners and viewers might be just tuning in going, gosh, this is compelling. I want to remind them of something really important and central to what you put forth. And that is that you say that emotions are vital intelligence. And I want to contrast that because most people are afraid of their emotions. They want to contain them. I see it all the time in the work that I'm doing inside companies. So I want to make sure that we're contrasting the traditional, usual view, outdated view of emotions here with the really vastly forward-thinking way that you're talking about them, because there's quite a chasm here, as I'm sure you quite know.
Mm-hmm.
A very, very, which makes you, really, really compelling to have on the show, and I really appreciate the work that you've done and who you're being in the world to steward it.
Well, so this difference in understanding of what your emotions are and why they are there and what caused them leads you to play a very different game with your emotions. So the traditional view of so-called negative emotions they are irrational, right? Which is, in my opinion, a very arrogant sort of view to take on it. It's like, just
Yes,
because you don't understand what your emotion's trying to tell you doesn't make it irrational.
right.
It means you just simply don't understand what it's trying to tell you. Um, so if someone is attributing their emotion to what is or isn't happening in the world, I'm in agreement that they're now in a negative state and that they should do everything they can to contain, control, manage their emotions. Because misinterpreted through the circumstantial view, every emotion, even the so-called positive ones, are damaging. That's why we have toxic positivity in organizations, as an example.
Right.
It's pleasurable emotions being misinterpreted through the circumstantial view. That's why pride has a bad name, right? Because it's confused with arrogance and conceit, which are functions of the circumstantial view. Pride, as in I'm personifying an ideal that many other people would also benefit. Our society is benefiting from me personifying this ideal, and the people around me might personify this ideal. Then I actually want to broadcast the fact that I might be someone worth emulating with respect to this particular quality, right? So that
Mhm.
I can take what I have cultivated and learned and embodied over many, many years, and you can pretty much steal it from me just by observing me and by osmosis, beginning to emulate some of those qualities. And human beings learn an enormous amount from each other through imitation, right? Anyone who's been a parent, watch their children. A tremendous amount of what our learning is through imitation. Well, what things are worth imitating and what things are not? Right? Shame and pride broadcast that to the people around us.
Mhm. Mm. So one of the things that I also appreciate about your work, Charles, is you really you talk about being able to understand our emotions and go to the root cause of our emotions, and then to be able to be empowered. You help people to be empowered to resolve them. And so I think that's really, really compelling. I don't think I've ever heard anybody use the word resolve emotions.
Mm-hmm.
So I want you to, if you could speak to that just a little bit, and then I want to get into your performance tuner perspective here, the 4 steps to your performance tuner perspective.
Mm. Sure, sure. So um, when painful, let me take a step back. So your subconscious is purring away, that it's churning away, it's fulfilling your psychological needs as best it can, and let's say, you're on track to fulfill a goal, and so it's sending up a pleasurable feeling of being productive. And basically I translate that as
Right.
keep going, you're
Right.
on track, right? um, in contrast, something happens, you have a plan, you're going to ask this coworker for the data, they're going to give it to you, you're going to have the report done on time. The coworker says, no, I can't get you the data. Then the subconscious is like, hey, we're no longer on track. The plan we put in place, we have a breakdown, right? And so frustration arises. It's a little uncomfortable. It's a little painful. It gets our attention, right? It's not as painful as fear. right? And because fear is pointing to a much more urgent need, which is some asset of yours needs protecting. But it gets your attention, and its request to the conscious mind is, hey, I have the assessment that we aren't on track to achieve a goal. I need you, the conscious mind, to resolve that assessment. When you resolve that assessment, I'll stop generating frustration. But I'm going to support us in being effective by continuing to generate frustration until you have resolved this underlying assessment that we're not on track. And I believe there's 3 and only 3 ways to resolve a painful emotion, this assessment that we're not on track to fulfill a need. So the most obvious way is to change our approach to fulfilling the need. Okay, so if we go back to the example, I've just asked my coworker for some data, they can't get me the data, I can change my strategy.
Right.
Okay, I can change my tactics. So, okay, is there another coworker I can get the data from? Can I go into the information system and figure out how to get the data myself? There's other approaches to this, right? But that would be a change in strategy or tactics. Okay. Another is to challenge the assessment that I'm not on track. My coworker can get me the data by noon tomorrow. My meeting at which I need to present is until 2. I have nothing between 12 and 2. It takes me 10 minutes with the Excel macros I've built to turn that data into the pieces of the report. Actually, I'm okay. I am on track. My subconscious is working with an outdated set of assumptions about how long it takes me to produce this report given the data. Right? The moment I realize that's true. Another example I use for this, which a lot of people can relate to, is I'm headed to an appointment, I hit traffic, I'm immediately frustrated. Wait a second. Traffic doesn't necessarily mean I'm not going to get to my appointment on time. I bring up my GPS, my Google says I'm going to get to my appointment 3 minutes early, even with the traffic jam. Great. I don't need to be frustrated, right? Or the third thing we can do is I call these things need, but I have a need to get to this appointment. And I have some preconceived ideas about what that means. I need to be physically there, sitting in my seat by this time. Well, can I modify the need? Can I modify basically what I've assigned my subconscious to do? If you think about your conscious mind as your CEO and your needs as your direct reports, I've assigned my subconscious, hey, you need to achieve this goal of getting us to the appointment on time. I could modify what I mean by that, and I'm going to arrive on time by phone, right, from my car. It's my meeting. I could postpone it. Actually, I'm kind of ancillary to that meeting. I don't need to be there. I'm going to drop my need to get there on time, right? So what people say when they're introduced to this idea is, oh my goodness, this is so empowering.
I was going to use that word before. Absolutely, it is empowering.
It's so empowering. And when you realize that you can resolve any need that you're not on track to fulfill, that you hold all the keys to doing that, then emotions become a lot less scary, right? And it can be a lot more helpful.
So as you're saying this, and of course I know how you're addressing this thing, it's what you're talking about, and here's what's great about what you're putting forth here. What you're talking about, Charles, is what you and I do when we're coaching people. The beauty in this is that people can learn this themselves, and that's even more empowering. So it's just, that's why, and I'll say more about this as we go along here. We've got to grab our next break here, but there's so many ways that we can use what you've created. It's just very compelling. I'm Elise Cortez, your host. We have been on the air with Charles Jones. He's the author of Emotional Intelligence for Stress-Free Leadership, Turn Emotional Pain into Performance Gain with the Tenor Method. We've been talking a bit about some of the theory and the science behind what he has put forth. After the break, we're going to get into his actual Tenor Method and also the way to be able to use it throughout your lives and your work. Stay with us. We'll be right back for that.
Dr. Elise Cortez is a management consultant specializing in meaning and purpose, an inspirational speaker and author. She helps companies visioneer for greater purpose among stakeholders and develop purpose-inspired leadership and meaning-infused cultures that elevate fulfillment, performance, and commitment within the workforce. To learn more or to invite Elise to speak to your organization, please visit her at elisecortez.com. Let's talk about how to get your employees working on purpose. This is Working on Purpose with Dr. Elise Cortez. To reach our program today or to open a conversation with Elise, send an email to Elise, A-L-I-S-E, at elisecortez.com. Now, back to Working on Purpose.
Thanks for staying with us and welcome back to Working on Purpose. If you're just joining us now, my guest is Charles Jones. He's the Emotion Decoder who has developed a fresh and what I would call very elevated method of understanding and working from our emotions. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez. So for this last segment here, Charles, I just really wanted to bring home. So we've been talking about some really different ideas that I hope our listeners and viewers are both getting excited by and compelled by the possibility of. And I want to now, if we can, spend the last segment just letting you really talk us through the tenor, as you call it, the tenor method.
Sure. Well, I think where I want to start is that is by actually painting a picture of how I believe we interact or dance with our emotions when we're in a natural state of flow. So I believe the state of peak performance and learning that is innate to us. I believe it looks like this. So at some point, we'll use the simplest example. We've set a goal for ourselves, and our subconscious is doing its best to achieve that goal, and it runs into a problem. There's some breakdown. It figures out, hey, we're not on track to achieve that goal, and so it starts generating feelings of frustration to get the attention of the conscious mind and draw its attention to the goal that we're not on track to achieve. So when things are working well, the frustration arises, we immediately turn our attention to it, we identify the goal we're not on track to achieve, and we decide, okay, am I going to modify my goal, modify the strategy I'm using to achieve the goal, or change my criteria I'm using to determine whether or not I'm on track to achieve this goal. And as soon as I have made that adjustment in my subconscious programming, then the emotion of frustration subsides, my need to achieve goals goes back to doing what it does best, and it generates these pleasurable feelings of productivity to let me know that I'm on track, right? And so, we're going through life, emotions, pleasurable and painful, are arising, and we're turning our attention and making adjustments when there's a painful emotion, and we're stepping on the gas, if you will, when there's a pleasurable one to keep us moving forward. And so I think that's our natural state of being. Because we've been culturally conditioned to misinterpret what our emotions are and what to do with them, something very different tends to happen. So frustration arises, and our response is, look, I don't want to hear from you. I'm busy. I'm trying to achieve some goals here. I'm busy. And I'm saying this to be, to kind of point out the irony of the whole thing. And so we suppress that frustration. And the suppression of that frustration, the emotions communicate, the subconscious communicates to the conscious mind through the body. So when emotions arise and express themselves in the body, if we shut that down, if we suppress, we do so by holding muscle groups tight. If people grind their teeth at night, or they end up with a lot of tension here and the back of their jaw and the back here, that's because they've been suppressing some of their frustration rather than allowing it to express itself through it. So when we're holding tension in our body that's not due to an injury or something like that, and common places are tightness in the upper back that's usually suppressing anxiety, a knot in the stomach. Anxiety doesn't cause that. Trying to suppress your anxiety causes it. Holding our sphincter tight, we're trying to suppress fear. Um, Stiffness in our upper chest, that's often like suppressing resentment. So whenever we have, we're holding tension in our body, it's usually because we are suppressing awareness of this vital information, this feedback on our own effectiveness from our subconscious. And the more that we do that, the more our subconscious tries to get our attention by moving our body and sending hormones and stuff into our bloodstream. And that's what most people call stress, right? There's some technical definitions of stress and eustress and stuff like that, but what people commonly refer to as stress is this combination of, holding certain muscle groups tight, and so you're exhausting stuff at the end of the day because it takes conscious effort to do that, as well as it's exhausting for the body to hold that tension. So the first step of the tenor method, it's an acronym, is tension. Really scan your body for tension, identify the tension, release the tension so you can feel the emotions that your subconscious is using to communicate with you. So that's step one.
Mm-hmm.
Step two, the E in tenor, TE, the E stands for emotion. And when emotions arise, they're communication, they're calls from our subconscious. And our subconscious, if you think about, if you have a child that comes up to you and, grabs your hand and it's like, Daddy, I want your attention. And if I'm insisting on staying on my cell phone or working on the task I'm at, the child just starts getting louder and louder and tugging harder and harder. And our needs are like that. When they need the attention of the conscious mind, right? And so the first step after an emotion arises is to name the emotion, to acknowledge that it exists. And there's actually some great neuroscience here from Matthew Lieberman on the effect of labeling your affect, of labeling your emotions. And if you correctly name the emotion you're experiencing, I'm angry, I feel angry, you'll actually experience an immediate sense of composure. You're still angry, but now you're composed, and you won't be reactive, right? So there's this misnomer, this idea that emotions drive behavior, but it's completely false. In fact, a different neuroscientist, Joseph Ledoux, has shown that the amygdala, which drives behavior in response to certain kinds of threats, is not the same area of the brain in which we experience fear and anger and other things. So emotions don't drive behavior, needs do. And if that need can't get the attention of the conscious mind to get its help, it needs to take things into its own hands. And so just like that child will eventually act out or go do whatever it is that it wants to do, that it wanted your attention for, our subconscious need sort of acts out. And that's where we get fight, flight, freeze, appease types of behavior. So if you want to reduce reactivity, name your emotions correctly as they arise. So that's TEN is needs. So in my book, I share 5 emotion decodes, where if you're feeling this emotion, it's always, 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 always because your subconscious has the assessment you're not on track to meet a particular need. And the emotion tells you what need it is. Frustration, achieve goals. Anger, assert rights. Shame, personify ideals. Guilt, uphold ethics, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I think we have about 50 of these fundamental psychological needs and their corresponding painful and pleasurable emotions. So you release tension from your body, you name your emotions, and then you decode your needs, right? And take ownership for them. Then you generate options. The O in tenor is options. And as I said before, there's 3 options you can do. You can modify the need, you can change your assessment whether you're on track, and you can upgrade your strategy, right? And then last but not least is, okay, you've gone through this process, you've come up with a way to resolve the assessment that you're not on track to fulfill a need, and with it, the underlying emotion. The R stands for resolution. And a problem that many people have is procrastination. And it was long thought that procrastination is someone's lazy, or they have a lack of willpower. It's not the case. Procrastination occurs when you're avoiding feeling an emotion that arises when you think about doing the task. Maybe it's boredom, maybe it's resentment, maybe it's anxiety that, what if I don't do it well, or whatever it is. And so if we make a practice of checking in with our subconscious before we make any decision, before we commit to any action, before we say yes to that decision, if we make a practice of just checking in and seeing if any of our subconscious needs, which again, process information much faster than we do, have an objection to it, and address that objection right then and there, then when it comes time to do the task, to follow through, we won't procrastinate, right? Because we're not faced with, but if we're going to kick the can down the road. And this practice of actually checking in with your subconscious before you make a decision can prevent a lot of different kinds of decision errors that we might have. It can also help us from not making impulsive mistakes. Like, have you ever had that email and you're just about to send it and something inside you kind of pauses and hesitates, but because you can't figure it out in 2 seconds, you press the send button, and that's like, oh, I forgot the attachment, or worse, right? So Tender is kind of a certain kind of mindfulness practice, right? You
Exactly
scan
the
your
word I
body.
was thinking of. Mm-hmm.
You scan your body for tension and release it. You name the emotions that are arising. You translate those into the underlying needs. You generate options to get that need back on track or drop the need entirely. And then you gut check your resolutions before you make them. And if you do these 5 things with consistency, then over time that will transform, not only will help you every time you do it in that transactional moment, in that particular instance, but as it becomes second nature, or really returns you to your original nature, you'll shift from someone who's kind of an emotional victim of life to someone who I call emotionally responsible.
Mm-hmm. In my view, Charles, putting this into practice will you do what I say, what my favorite word, radically improve the quality of your relationships and the results that you get in life, as far as I could see it. We are at the end of the show here. Can I just give you, say, 15 seconds to just close as you like? What would you like to leave our listeners with?
I don't know, there's so many things I could do with it, but just befriend your emotions. Like, really see them as your greatest guide and friend, and heal the relationship between your conscious mind and your subconscious needs. Life becomes much easier. You flow through it. You're more effective. And we haven't discussed at all the implications of this for how you relate to others, but other people are like you, a conscious mind and a set of subconscious needs. And the more empathically attuned you can be to your needs and to other people's needs, and use your conscious mind to acknowledge and support those needs in staying on track, the better your relationships will become, the more effective you'll be at work, and a better life you'll lead, the more engaged you'll be in your life, the more meaning there will be, and the more effective you'll be.
Beautiful way to finish, Charles. Thank you very much. I so appreciate getting to know you, having you on my show, sharing with my listeners and viewers. You've certainly elevated my life already by teaching me what you put forth in your work, and I would putting it into practice. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much for having me on the show, Elise.
You're welcome. listeners and viewers, you got to get more of this man here. If you want to learn more about the work that he does, his books, go to Tenor Method. Let me spell it for you. TENOR Method, MOTOHOD. You can also go to adaptivemastery.com. Either one will get you to the same place, but check out his work and get connected to this man. Last week, if you missed the live show, you can always catch it via recorded podcast. We were on the air with Faisal Haq talking about his book, Lift, Fostering the Leader in You Amid Revolutionary Global Change. He puts forth a model of transformational leadership where everyone in an organization is activated to work toward its objectives and mission. So in other words, it really activates every individual in the organization for their best. It's pretty fantastic. Next week, we'll be back on the show once again with Alton Mills, this time to talk about his book, Be Unstoppable, the 8 Essential Actions to Succeed at Anything. See you there. And remember, work is an integral and important part of our lives and can be one of the best adventures and means of realizing our potential and making the impact we crave. So let's work on purpose.
We hope you've enjoyed this week's program. Be sure to tune into Working on Purpose, featuring your host, Dr. Elise Cortez, each week on W4CY. Together, we'll create a world where business operates conscientiously, leadership inspires impassioned performance, and employees are fulfilled in work that provides the meaning and purpose they crave. See you there. Let's work on purpose.